Hello, welcome back to my fave fanfics. Here, I post, well, my favorite fanfictions, if that wasn't obvious. I do hope you'll enjoy them as much as I do. Please like and subscribe for more content. Without further ado, let's get started.
Welcome to the third part of What If Toshiro Hitsugaya Was Sent to Hogwarts? Chapter 7. Ghosts and Boggarts. Teal orbs glowed in the night as the lone transfer student wandered the silent castle. Most of its occupants asleep as the said person almost floated over his inspection of the castle. Toshiro sighed lightly in the darkness as he made his way down the hall that had just made itself apparent, the captain still in his gigai. In accordance to orders, Kuritsuchi had discovered that wizards would be able to see Shinigami if exposed to enough ryotsu, eventually allowing them to see them. By the mad scientist's estimates, only third years and above would be able to see them. Due to the discoveries of such, all of the captains with the exception of himself, had deemed it safer to have the ice captain to remain in his gigai unless the situation called for otherwise. After sending Urahara a request to create a gigai for Hirenmaru via Korohana, Toshiro, dressed in a black hakama, had decided to confide to the resident souls of Hogwarts whom had yet to make an appearance since the school year had begun, being only a night ago. I need to find these ghosts before I am exposed. Toshiro thought to himself as he shunned Pio'd to hall, not a soul other than himself in sight. It is plausible that they are afraid of you, master. Hirenmaru advised. They are souls that have yet to move on, having chosen to remain in the world of the living. Perhaps they fear that a greater power other than a grunt Shinigami has come to collect them under the guise of a child. Also, they have yet to understand as to why you are here, master. Should we await this one out? Sephiroth added, his deep yet youthful voice expressionless. No. The Ice Serpentine and Master said in unison. If we delay with the spirits of the wizards, they may become uncomfortable and resort to informing teachers or the headmaster. Or worse, the very students themselves. Sephiroth agreed as he received two answers of approval. How will we find these spirits? They will find us. Toshiro merely answered as a sliver of a ghostly white sailed over the captain who watched the spirit warily. Like the stereotypical ghost implied, the lady was transparent and floated over her steps toward him, her ballroom dress ending in silver wisps nearing him with caution and fear in her gray eyes. She was beautiful, and appeared to be no older than her mid-30s, her pale lips tinged with a slight pink and her once brown hair done fancily, ending at her waist. You are one of the death gods, the servants who guide the dead into the afterlife, are you not, child? She asked, her voice soft and gentle as the captain's mood darkened at the last title. As to proper etiquette, I am Helena Ravenclaw, or the Grey Lady, the ghost of Ravenclaw. I am not a child. Toshiro snapped instinctively as the lady before him flinched. And yes, I am. My name is Toshiro Hitsugaya, captain of the 10th division of the 13 court squads of Soul Society. Before allowing the lady to continue, Toshiro lifted a hand to silence her as he continued. I am aware of your agreement as witches and wizards to remain within these castle walls. As to why I am here, I would prefer not to repeat myself. So, the rest of you who are within these walls, reveal yourself and so that we may speak. Judging from the widened eyes from the lady, they had not known that soul reapers would be able to sense others with ryotsu. One by one, the spirits appeared, one's bloody, one's friendly, one's indifferent, but all held a cautious air as they knew what the captain was. Is there a place in which we are able to speak in private and without interruption, whether it be students or teachers? Toshiro inquired, his gaze upon the lady who had revealed herself first. There is the room of requirement, the Grey Lady said, as she took the lead, all of the other ghosts close behind her as the captain lingered behind, purposely to ensure that none of the ghosts had second thoughts. Eventually, the ghosts and the captain had come to a grey wall with a simple tapestry hanging innocently over it. Raising an eyebrow in question, the captain turned to the Grey Lady. This room only appears if the said person is in dire need of something, and therefore, whatever it may be, the room will shift. This need, you must think solely upon it, and walk past the wall thrice and it shall appear before you. Raising an eyebrow at the oddity of the request, Toshiro merely relented as he did as said, and slowly, a large door appeared before the captain, who lifted the tapestry for entrance. The room was large and spacious, with Gothic windows shining moonlight into the room. At the very end, a crackling fire of blue flames and a single armchair in front of it, with several warm couches of a variety of colors, from the royal red to an emerald green. As if the seats were marked for each ghost, the ghost drifted over to the couches and seated themselves, the captain doing the same with the armchair which he had expected was for him. I am here to observe the known beings of wizardry and witchcraft, and to learn myself of the capabilities of such. And my superior, the head captain of which I am sure you are all aware and familiar with, has decided to send myself. Toshiro began, as he smirked internally at the paling of the ghosts at the mention of the head captain, if the ghosts become any paler. I see, the Grey Lady said from a purple couch, her voice soft and airy as she surveyed the captain. Seeing how your appearance is convincing to attend Hogwarts, you were chosen to enter here, and along the way as you complete your mission are also able to learn. Nodding in reply but conveying nothing else in no other form, Toshiro turned as the attention shifted to a rather bloodied ghost, who was judging from the hushed whispers, the Bloody Baron. Then Captain Hitsugaya, inform us this, do you have any intention of harming any of the students? The male ghost interrogated, his tone demanding and slightly arrogant. The said ghost was dressed in dress robes covered with blood, judging from it originated from his own and another, and the fact that the ghost carried chains, was too close to a grounded soul for Toshiro's taste. It is dependent upon them, Toshiro replied evasively, his eyes narrowed. How so? A ghost asked with poorly veiled hostility, as all of the ghosts seemed grow a bit tense, even with the slightest being the Grey Lady's twitch of her elegant fingers. If the situation deems for any harm towards myself, I will retaliate if necessary. But I will not lift a finger if it pertains to the injury of the other students, they are not my concern, Toshiro said, without a trace of sympathy or warmth. I am only here to observe, and therefore, observe I will and only that. How cold. The Grey Lady thought as she looked at Toshiro with pity. He is a mere child, yet they have already drilled it within Soul Society that orders are not to be disobeyed. After a terse silence, the said lady spoke. Very well, Captain Hitsugaya, smiling as she said them. As long as you do not harm any of the students, you shall have us in our protection as well. You are, after all, a student here as well. Allowing himself a small smirk, Toshiro nodded in acknowledgement of the lady's words, calming the tension of the room. Taking this as their cue to leave, each ghost relayed their sentiments to the captain, who merely nodded at each, until it was only he and the lady were left. You are quite odd, Captain Hitsugaya, the lady voiced as she stood to address him, who rose an eyebrow in question, to which she shook her head. I am not pertaining to your reputation, age, appearance, or icy bestows, but to yourself. A confused expression flashed over the captain's face for a brief moment before regaining its stoic mask, eyes questioning with a silent ferocity. You are cold, merciless when ordered, yet you are willing to bend for the sake of those you love and cherish. You are warmer and softer than you appear, Captain Hitsugaya. You are no different, Lady Ravenclaw, Toshiro addressed, his tone blasé. You appear to wish to be alone and isolated, yet from your flamboyant dresses and stature, you value class and status as much as any other woman of your time. You are quiet yet observing, like an eagle awaiting upon its perch as to when to strike. The gray lady blinked at the boy's accuracy of reading her. It was yet to be a full hour, and yet the boy had read her flaws and strengths so quickly and similarly to what her mother once voiced to her. It seems as if there is more to you than meets the eye, Captain Hitsugaya. She voiced quietly, her eyes turning to the captain, only to meet an empty blue armchair. Seeing as how you have had yet to see much of anything or even remotely aware of my people, yes, there is. Toshiro voiced from the exit, his voice phlegmatic as he left the Ravenclaw ghost with more questions than answers. After a rather boorish hour of divination in ancient runes, other than the revelation that the Potter boy was destined to die in accordance to reading tea leaves, the captain did not know what was worse, the fact that the students needed an omen to confirm that, or the shocking revelation that Potter was to die. Toshiro entered the defense against the dark arts classroom after a majority of his housemates, his cloak and scarf billowing behind him as he hid his golden time turner under the teal scarf. The class was shared within the same period with cohorts despite the segregation of houses, although the captain did not understand the point of separating the children upon the basis of chivalry, cunning, intellect, or loyalty. Such a concept would have died quickly in Soul Society, for if not for the varying talents of each division, the ice captain along with his class would have not as made it as what they were currently. Shaking away his thoughts, the ice captain stood aside from a majority of the class, not a part of them but not too much to be considered isolated. Instead of desks and textbooks, Professor Lupin had instructed them to stand before a reflective closet, shaking every once in a while, much to the majority of the students' anxiety. Intriguing, isn't it? The werewolf professor asked rhetorically, as the center group of students flinched visibly at the slight shake of the closet. Namely, Weasley. Would anyone like to venture a guess as to what is inside? The professor continued, an answer given immediately. That's a boggart, that is. Very good, Mr. Thomas. Lupin acknowledged with nod. Now, can anybody tell me what a boggart looks like? Quote. No one knows, Hermione answered, making her presence known to Ron, who recoiled in surprise. When did she get here? Exclamation mark. Quote. Ignoring the redhead, Hermione continued. Boggarts are shapeshifters. They take the shape of whatever a person fears the most. That's what makes them so terrifying. Yes, 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 Lupin finished as he walked to the front to face the class. Luckily, a very simple charm exists to repel a boggart. Let's practice it now. Without wands, please. After me. Ridiculous. Quote. Ridiculous. The class, well, those who chose to answer at least, the captain not being one of them, answered. A being that configures into what an individual fears the most. Toshiro mused as he tried the incantation mentally, without the usage of his wand. Perhaps we can use these beings for Soul Society in On Mosquito for interrogation. And you say I'm the one who people run away from. Hirinmaru grumbled playfully as Toshiro rose an eyebrow internally. However, Master. Hirinmaru continued, his tone no longer playful. I advise caution. This being configures into what you fear the most. Nodding in agreement, Toshiro assured his Zanpakuto and Wand Guardian that caution would be exercised as he turned once again to the lesson at hand, his blank features unchanging. Very good. Lupin encouraged as he tried to instill confidence in the hesitant class. A little louder and be clear. Ridiculous. Quote. Ridiculous. The class echoed, following the instructions given. This class is ridiculous. A voice spat out in the captain as he blinked to the corner of his eye to find the person to be none other than Draco Malfoy, with his lackey nodding in dumb agreement. Shrugging off the comment, as others were entitled to what they wished to think, the captain thwarted his attention from the blonde and back to the class. The professor who addressed the class promptly, as the captain merely exchanged glances with Malfoy, neither speaking a word. So much for the easy part. You see, the incarnation alone is not enough. You see, what really finishes off a boggart is laughter. You need to force it to assume a shape you find truly amusing. Let me explain. Lupin began as he chose his example. Neville, would you join me please? Quote. Too easy. Toshiro thought, as the spirits in his inner world rumbled their agreement. He is going to be killed if he does not learn to defend himself. Come on. Don't be shy. Come on. The professor encouraged, as a nervous and slightly shaking Neville walked to the front. It's like ushering a canine. Toshiro sighed as he watched the debacle. More like comforting a frightened gerbil. Hiranmaru supplied. I thought he looked more like a cornered rat. Sephiroth added, as Toshiro silenced the two, turning back to Neville. Hello, Neville. Lupin greeted silently, his smile friendly. What frightens you most of all? Single quote. PR Professor Snape. The boy mumbled incoherently in his mouth as the ice captain repelled an urge to scoff. Sorry? Quote. Professor Snape. Neville replied clearer as all of the students broke into smiles, whether amused ones or sneering. Professor Snape. Lupin laughed lightly to himself, as if reminiscing an old memory. Yes, frightens all. And I believe you live with your grandmother? Lupin questioned. Yes. But I don't want it to turn into her either. Neville replied, igniting some laughs from behind. No, Lupin trailed off. It won't. I want you to picture her clothes. Ignoring the confused look on his student's face, Lupin continued clearly and firmly. Only her clothes, very clearly, in your mind. She carries a red handbag, the boy began, as if trying to recall as Lupin shook his head. We don't need to hear. Lupin stopped the boy. As long as you see it, we'll see it. Now, when I open that wardrobe, here's what I want you to do. Nearing the clearly frightened Neville, the professor whispered softly into the boy's ear, unheard by all but Neville and the captain, who blinked in surprise at the professor's instructions. Can you do that? Lupin asked to the stupefied Neville, who nodded dumbly, both pulling out their respective wands in ready. 1, 2, 3. With a sharp clink, the knob on the closet turned, opening the said closet to reveal a brooding and sneering Snape, his hair greasily curtained over his face, eyes beady and intimidating as Neville began to shake, Lupin silently encouraging behind him. Think. Neville, think. The professor encouraged as a fire of determination grew in the boy's eyes, his wand at the ready. Ridiculous. Quote. And with a change of clothing, the potions master had changed into wearing a tight green skirt, a old-fashioned mink coat, a ruffled top, and to accessorize, a red handbag with the eagle-topped hat to finish. Much to the amusement of the class as laughter ensued. Wonderful, Neville, wonderful. Lupin chuckled along with the class as he instructed the class to line up, to have their go at the boggart. With much shoving and pushing, the captain waited as the children lined up excited as he stood aside in the back, taking the voices in his inner world to account. So then, it began. One after another, student after student took on the boggart, each one calling forth laughter to all the students. Then came Ron's turn, who had added roller skates to his greatest fear, a large spider, amusement and laughter ensuing behind him as Lupin shouted praises. As the boggart rolled haphazardly, it was then that things began to spiral downward, landing in front of Toshiro. A pop was heard as the boggart shifted, the class smiling faces shifting toward the boggart, curious as to what the transfer's fear was, only to have their faces contort into horror as several students began to scream. Snow covered the Toshiro's feet as the captain stood in front of the changed boggart, transfixed at the dark red that covered a majority of the white snow. Bodies of Matsumoto, Ichigo, Renji, Rukia, Hinamori, Yukitake, Kiraku, his men, nearly every Shinigami the captain knew littered the snow, their blank and dead eyes wide open with shock, fear, and accusation. The head captain stood in front of the ice captain in the midst of the bloody scene, Zanpakuto unsheathed and bloodied as he spoke in English for all to understand, as the students and professor alike were too transfixed to move. Captain Hitsugaya Toshiro. "This is your doing," the head captain said sagely. "As a child, you have failed your mission as a captain and thus have caused such calamity. Because of your incompetence and ignorance, you have failed. With their lives as the price. They have perished and have been killed because of you." The ice captain shook his head slowly, his expression frozen, fear laced in his voice as he whispered. "No. I should have known better not to entrust a child with such a responsibility. You are not worthy of life," the elderly Shinigami continued. "Live on in repentance for your ignorance and incompetence, Hitsugaya. Why should you escape into death when you have shortened the lives of others?" Quote. To Lupin's horror, the professor saw how the transfer had actually believed the elderly man's words, the acceptance and fear of himself gleaming brightly in those teal orbs. "You are not worthy of life nor death. However, upon the faulty of your failure, death is your option." Yamamoto continued as he held out his Zanpakuto to the captain's chest, Toshiro making no move to stop him, only bowing his head in acceptance, the captain's Zanpakuto and guardian's voices falling to deaf ears. "And therefore death shall it be. End it, Captain Hitsugaya." Yamamoto Sutaicho was right. Why should he live? They died because of his failure. Death was too much of a luxury for his mistakes, but it must be done. As repentance for what he has done. Toshiro thought as he felt the blade begin to tear his clothing, but only stared blankly at bodies of Matsumoto and Hinamori. All his fault. All because he failed. Toshiro. It's not real. It is only a boggart. An illusion. Hirinmaru cried within the captain's inner world without avail, Sephiroth doing the same as his own efforts were just as fruitless. No. Harry and Neville cried as they broke out of their frozen stupor, the former pushing the captain out of the way and the latter pulling him bodily away from the boggart, as it shifted to a Dementor, its now menacing black shrouds hovering over the Chosen One. Breaking out of his own frozen state, Lupin quickly strode in front of Harry, the boggart shifting once again into a white full orb shrouded by dark clouds. Ridiculous. The professor snapped with a wave of his wand as the boggart became a white balloon as to the werewolf spell, the closet opening, closing, and finally, locking with a loud click. Silence fell over the students as they turned to the white-haired transfer, who had seated himself on the floor with Neville and Harry, both mirroring the looks of pity, confusion, shock, and horror. The transfer in question merely stared in front of him blankly, his teal orbs eerily haunted. Just what did this child go through to have a fear as horrifying as that? Lupin questioned silently to himself as he addressed the class. 5 points awarded to each student who faced the boggart, and homework shall be to read the chapter on boggarts with a summary by the end of the week. Class dismissed, except for Mr. Hitsugaya. With slight reluctance from the Golden Trio and Neville, the class shuffled out, leaving a blank Toshiro, who had gathered enough of himself to seat himself in front of Lupin's desk, his eyes still vacant. Hitsugaya. Lupin said silently, as the captain looked up to meet the werewolf's gaze. Do you wish to tell me something? I'm all ears as to what you tell me, as none of the words spoken will not leave this room other than the events of the class period, which I can guarantee the entire school shall be informed of by the end of the day. Spreading like wildfire, before the event of dinner, I presume? Toshiro replied dryly, his voice flat. Cracking a small smile, the professor nodded. Unfortunately. I apologize for the scene I have caused the class today, Professor Lupin. Toshiro began as he held up a hand to the professor's open mouth to protest, a bitter and cynical yet small smile crossing his lips. Do not refute my apology, Professor. My fear is my own, as it is only a tad more vivid than my cohort's, but the fear of failure all the same. I was warned as to what and the abilities of a boggart, yet still I believed it. How foolish of me. The captain scolded himself lightly, almost wistfully, as he bowed his head to the professor as the captain made for the exit, pausing at the door. Excuse me, Professor. Thank you. There was a small crack and the captain was gone. Chapter 8. Juggling Negotiations. Fortunately, it was before dinner and the last class of the day. However, that was no indication of stopping the rumors. By the following hour, the halls of Hogwarts were bustling with chatter of the white-haired transfer and the imaginations of young children, from the theory of being abused when the transfer was young to being abducted in his youth and was living with his kidnappers. Dinner was no better, as Harry and Ron seated themselves next to Hermione, all three quiet as the topic of Toshiro bustled around them. He makes ours look like nothing, ya know? Ron began as he placed a piece of chicken in his mouth, chewing the meat slowly for once as his friends turned to him with questioning expressions. Hitsugaya, I mean. Ron laughed, his mouth slightly full as he elaborated. His fear of losing all those people, when I'm afraid of spiders. And, Myone's of McGonagall telling her she failed. Even Harry's Dementor was silly compared to his. I know. Harry acknowledged as Hermione nodded, playing with her salad absent-mindedly. Just what do they do in the East to have a kid like Hitsugaya want to kill himself because of his failure? Isn't that what school is for? For you to make mistakes and learn from them? Quote. It's not like that. A voice said as the three turned to see Neville join them, the nervous-looking boy with a worried expression on his face as he seated himself next to Hermione, across from Ron and Harry. Hitsugaya told me how his school and society to Hogwarts were like comparing hell and heaven for similarities. Maybe Hitsugaya's school is not as forgiving? Quote. That would explain why he is so secretive and cold, Hermione mused. Maybe in the East, children are taught to be respectful and contain their emotions like Hitsugaya is like? Quote. You are correct in the former, Granger, but the latter is one that I personally uphold is all. A familiarly cold and icy voice snapped as the attention of the students within the dining room turned to the ice captain who stood at the end of the Gryffindor table, nearest to the doors. Taking in the white-haired transfer with concerned eyes, the professors and headmaster took notice of the sword strapped to the captain's back. The said blade was large, and almost as tall as the captain himself, its hilt an icy blue with a star-pointed guard, held by a metal chain that met with a shined bronze clip. Hitsugaya. Harry said loudly, as he stood towering next to the captain who met his gaze unfazed, a white eyebrow risen. Are you all right? Quote. Lidding his eyes, the captain audibly sighed as the students and professors watched with terse breaths. I am fine. The boggart simply caught me off guard. I was not aware that it would manifest itself into that. What's with the sword, Hitsugaya? Ron blurted out, the chatter of the dining hall slowly growing as the attention on the white-haired captain was prominent yet not as much so, with side glances and long-distant stares, not that the captain paid any heed to them. It was easily dealt with as the captain had gone through this routinely and for as long as he could remember. "I'm going to kill someone with it," the captain deadpanned, as the students within earshot looked at the captain with widened eyes, along with the headmaster and following professors nearing the captain. "Master, that was not funny," Hiranmaru said as Toshiro merely shrugged internally. They had it coming. What else was I going to do with a sword? She were not just slice cucumbers, did they think? It's like asking Matsumoto what she is going to do with sake. The ice captain grumbled, Hiranmaru chuckling softly. "True, master." Sephiroth smiled softly, his tone light. It is synonymous of asking a wizard is what to do with a potion or a wand for the matter. "I must say that I cannot tell whether you are being sarcastic or serious, Hitsugaya." Hermione sighed lightly as she finally made her conclusion obvious to the oblivious children. "He's being sarcastic to joke with us." With a light chuckle that surprised all, they all turned to the captain, who wore a dark smirk that sent involuntary chills down their spines as the girl squeaked out an embarrassed, "What?" Quote, "What is hilarious, Granger, is that you think I am joking," the captain said darkly as the captain's expression returned to his blank one as he turned, addressing the headmaster and the professors. "I presume that you wish to see me in your office, headmaster?" "Along with the accompaniment of the professors, of course?" Quote. With an acknowledging yet sympathetic smile, the headmaster merely nodded as the icy transfer apparated away, the soft pop as silent as ever. Following ensued with the captain, the headmaster merely smiled encouragingly to the trio and set off into his office, the professors in tow. Then came in Seamus Finnegan, his high-pitched voice bellowing of the latest of the wizarding world's current loose killer spotted near Hogsmeade. Harry ran a tired hand through his unruly black hair as he sighed aloud, wishing that why couldn't he have a normal year at Hogwarts. The captain stood in front of the seated headmaster and surrounding professors once again, his teal eyes blank and colored with a hint of fear, anxiety, and mistrust as the ice captain tried to keep up his cover, still slightly peeved to be doing such a thing. Holding his tongue, the ice captain held no authority as a student, therefore awaited until he was addressed, as Toshiro could practically hear the thoughts being filed in order to interrogate as much information as they could from him. A pitiful effort, really. Toshiro had had more powerful, evil, and sadistic beings who had tried to do the same and fail, having tasted the Hiranmaru's icy blade. "We were informed of how your first-hand experience with a boggart was, Mr. Hitsugaya." Dumbledore began carefully, his words obviously well chosen. Professor Lupin believed that it was something to be concerned over. Lidding his eyes halfway, Toshiro merely waved a hand, his voice ending with a tone of finality. "I appreciate Professor Lupin's concern, Headmaster. However, there is no need for you to concern yourselves over this incident. I have recovered my composure, and therefore, fine. Perhaps, Mr. Hitsugaya." Dumbledore sighed, seeing as how the transfer refused to budge. "Then may I inquire as to what your thoughts are of the school? It is nice to hear what an outsider would regard of our school." Teal eyes narrowed on the warmly delivered yet trap inquiry as the captain answered, not bothering to hold back his bluntness. "It is everything which I had perceived of it." As if understanding the captain's non-answer, the headmaster nodded, as the professors exchanged glances while stealing some between the aloof captain and the still smiling Dumbledore. "Now then, to the issue of your weapon, Mr. Hitsugaya," the headmaster addressed as the eyes in the room turned to the blade on the captain's back, save for Toshiro's, who knew that this topic would arrive sooner or later. "Hogwarts does not allow weaponry of any kind to be wielded by our students, Mr. Hitsugaya, other than wands which are magic-wielding weaponry. This is my katana," Toshiro began as he internally soothed his Zanpakuto, miffed that his master would call him something as simple as a mere samurai blade. In my society, only those who qualify as worthy of spiritual power are allowed, along with being able to wield. Through these blades configured by a special metal and materials, which will obey only its master and that sole master alone, we are able to wield our strongest abilities of magic. Hook, line, and sinker. Toshiro thought in unison with Hiranmaru, as Sephiroth had no choice but to agree. They are too gullible. Sephiroth sighed as the questions in the professor's eyes were nearly glowing at the brink of blurting. And why were we not informed of this on an earlier occasion, Hitsugaya? Snape interrogated immediately as the potion's master narrowed his eyes at the white-haired transfer. I was only authorized to tell what my grandfather deems to be appropriate, Professor. Along with my own decision to add. As I believe, the thought of wandless magic and my own capabilities were already overwhelming enough at our last meeting together. Toshiro reasoned, his eyebrow risen in challenge. Sniffing at the words, Snape made no counter as Flitwick took over. We understand, Mr. Hitsugaya. We made no offense to you nor your society and customs. We were merely being cautious. Will you answer our questions if they are suitable to be so? Quote. I intend to, Professor. Toshiro replied, emotionlessly as he narrowed his eyes in an afterthought. However, I believe you all owe myself several answers as well. Stiffening at the captain's words, the professors exchanged nervous and anxiety-filled glances as Dumbledore replied, his voice guarded yet still warm. As professors, it is our job to answer your questions, Mr. Hitsugaya. Ask away. But for every question you ask, we shall ask. With a hard stare, the white-haired captain obliged as he agreed with the terms. Who is Peter Pettigrew? The following morning, Toshiro was seated on the roof of the Gryffindor Tower, his silky snow tresses dancing in the chilly winds as his teal scarf joined in the fray. The said captain dressed in only his white shirt and black pants, with his black soles dangling dangerously over the edge of the roof, his cloak and tie discarded. The ever-growing chill in the breeze soothed the captain as his soul phone informed the captain of the hour. There were several hours until class began, leaving the captain plenty of time to complete his research of the wizards, which so far, reserved no threat. Yet by the urgent call he had received from Soul Society, that remained to be seen if the head captain had good reason to conduct such dire measures. Concealing himself in a simple Keto barrier, Toshiro shunned peyoed off the tower into the dewy woodlands, just outside of the perimeter of Hogwarts, the Dementors having receded as dawn broke. Entering a lone cave, the captain extended the barrier as he entered deeper into the cave's caverns, stopping with a large screen at the end of the said cave as he merely nodded to a black cat who smirked at him as she too followed the captain, but lingered in the shadows as the screen began to spring to life. The screen was large and was powered through thick and robust lines, varying from reddish-purple to a dull azul in color as the black screen of the visual communication flickered, static with a mixture of a high and brooding voice sounding from the invisible speakers, as the screen revealed a researcher from the 12th Division without a doubt, seeing the white lab coat over the Shinigami's robes. Flinching at the sight of the white-haired captain, the brown shoulder-length-haired Shinigami stuttered a greeting, the top knot at the front of his head bobbing as the researcher bowed continuously. I apologize for the delay. Why? This is the communication server for the Bureau of Technological Development. Waving off the stutter with a passive blink, the captain merely said in an almost bored tone, Captain of the 10th Division, Hitsugaya Toshiro. Acknowledged, sir. Rin Subakura replied, with relief hinted in his voice. I'll transfer you now, sir. Only giving a nod in reply, The captain kept his stoic expression as the screen flickered to static before displaying a feed that Toshiro had more often seen himself participating in than a viewer. Aligned in 2 lines with each of their lieutenants kneeling at the feet with the exception of the head captains, the captains stared back through an equally large screen that projected their youngest colleague, his teal eyes just as cold as they remembered. Hitsugaya Taicho. The head captain began as he slammed his cane on the wooden floorboards for attention. I trust that you have secured the area, so that this meeting is not eavesdropped into? Quote. Yes, sir, Hitsugaya replied simply, as he flicked out his wand, well aware of the observing eyes of his fellow captains and his own lieutenant along with the other 12. I have placed several charms and complicated jinxes to notify if we are being eavesdropped or mistakenly found. Nodding in content of the ice captain's precautions, the head captain continued, as expressions hardened. Now that all high-ranking members of the 13 court squads are present, we shall commence our meeting. There is only one sole reason as to why we have taken a risk and have communicated this way to you, Hitsugaya Taicho. The head captain began, as his red eyes opened a crack, a rarity within itself. We have discovered that Aizen may have had a hand in the wizarding world. Toshiro hid his mild surprise with a slight widening of his eyes, only to narrow them once more, silently questioning as his fellow captains did the same, only Yukitaki, Kyoraku, and Unohana being the exceptions. Deemed irrelevant of the time with the Arankars, Yukitaki Taicho, as you all remember, had searched through Aizen Sosuke's belongings and the research conducted in the central 46 chambers, discovering Aizen's plot to retrieve the Okayan. However, the head captain paused, his eyes now fully opened to see his tensioned captains and lieutenants, with a seemingly calm Hitsugaya. It seems that Aizen was interested in the Heavenly Guardian. All eyes flickered to the ice captain projected in the screen as the said captain merely deepened his frown, as he answered with suppressed anger in his icy teal eyes. There were circumstances that, even though the professors of Hogwarts had not informed me, were rather strange. Reporting the incident with the wand shop, Toshiro paused as questions were voiced. This being in your wand, Hitsugaya Taicho, he can coincide in your inner world? The head captain all but interrogated as the addressed captain nodded, obliging to the silent command as he flicked out the said wand and retreated into his inner world. Master. 2 voices breathed in unison, power resonating in their words. With a small storm of blizzard-like winds and sleet, the high-ranking officers of the Gote 13 blinked in surprise at the sight of the ice captain, or rather the fact that 2 beings stood by his side. Materialized by their master's side, Hirenmaru stood with an unsheathed blade, its chain and crescent blade wrapped over the Zanpakuto's lavender kimono. With guarded gazes turned to Sephiroth, who too held his own bone-white flat blade in defense. Icy blue eyes glaring behind white bangs tinted with a hint of an icy hue. His name is Sephiroth, Toshiro explained simply, his voice void. He has sworn loyalty to myself and Hirenmaru, myself as his master and Hirenmaru as his elder. Nodding in acknowledgement of the ice captain's words, the head captain addressed the dragon himself. Are all creatures within these wands sentient, Sephiroth, last of the Fleur? Quote. No, sir. The white-haired youth replied, his voice much like his master's only as slightly less deeper than Hirenmaru. They are only partly sentient, having perished in peace. I, being a superiorly intellectual being than a majority of my kind in the West, am able to coexist within my master's inner world. Therefore, only a wand constructed of a being of my own intellect and kind would be able to have the same sentience as I. The probability of that being? A petite woman with piercing gray eyes and short black bangs over her forehead, looping into 2 braids which each ended with a golden ring, questioned suspiciously. She wore a sleeveless haori like Toshiro, in traditional Shinigami garments, differing only in her yellow obi and traditional Chinese black shoes. Herself being Soifun, captain of the 2nd Division and the commander of the Onmitsukido. None. The ice dragon supplied evenly, unfazed by the mistrust in the woman's eyes. As my master has explained, I am the last of my kind, and my wand was crafted several millennium ago. Therefore, the only wand of any sentiment of this time and age. A nod in understanding of the ice dragon's words, the head captain once again addressed another topic at hand, his red eyes cracking open a slit. And these dementors, Hitsugaya Taicho, they are the source of which caused the souls to have perished into states that are devoid of happiness. Quote. Yes, sir, Toshiro reported, as he narrowed his gaze as his lieutenant and fellow captains narrowed their own, knowing something was amiss as the head captain did the very opposite, his eyes opening a sliver wider. They, however, were the fortunate ones. Toshiro recounted his readings with slight anger as he could see the same fury in the lieutenants knelt at the captain's feet, with each of their superiors' facial expressions pulled to a subsequent frown, anger well hidden like the ice captain's. Whether these souls are within the dementors, I do not know, as it is merely speculation. However, the Ministry of Magic regulates and wields control over these beings. These wizards actually employ these hollow-like beings? Exclamation mark. Kiyaraku questioned aloud as a majority of the viewers watched the white-haired captain nod in response with slightly widened gazes. Prison guards for their most notorious criminals, Toshiro supplied as he added another as an afterthought. With one being on the loose. Following the order to elaborate, Toshiro proceeded to explain his new information from the previous night, of this Sirius Black, Harry Potter, Peter Pettigrew's murder, and the Dark Wizard of Voldemort. They are dependent upon this boy to their salvation? Yukataki questioned aloud, his tone all but indignant. A 13-year-old child? Quote. The blonde captain of the 3rd Division scoffed. Thinking that this Voldy moron is dead and won't come back will only get all of them killed. How idiotic. The shrimp is just bait for that Voldy freak. Kenpachi grinned as he laughed at the ludicrousness of the idea. Even this single-eyed idiot knows that the very thought of placing faith that child is an absurd thought. Miyuri chuckled through his white and gold teeth as he sneered an afterthought. Although I have been saying the same for the past century now. Toshiro darkened his glare through the screen as Hirenmaru and Sephiroth followed in suit, as the head captain addressed the masked 12th Division captain before he could. Enough, Kuritsuchi Taicho. Hitsugaya Taicho is a captain as the requirements have met. We are not as foolish enough as to place the entire faith of our world on the shoulders of a 13-year-old child. And of your Zanpakuto, Hitsugaya? Yukataki asked, his kind face directed to the smaller white-haired captain. I have transfigured Hirenmaru's Gigai, courtesy of Urahara, into a bracelet. The ice captain elaborated briefly, as he held up the said bracelet over his small wrist. The band was a simple dull gold, with 8 spikes much like the blade's hilt during Bankai, ice interwoven over the gold as it simmered in the dark cavern as the head captain slammed his cane on the wood floorboards once again for attention and silence. Hitsugaya Taicho, you're to inquire into these dementors and if it is possible to free the theorized entrapped souls. The head captain began, as he closed his eyes in finality, his words intent with deeper meaning which all the captains other than Kenpachi seemed to catch on to. As to this Sirius Black and Voldemort, they are not our main concern, however, to merely caution against. And the boy? Toshiro inquired with a subtle annoyance, knowing the answer already all too well. The same to him. Sighing lightly, the ice captain allowed Hirenmaru and Sephiroth to dissipate into his inner world as he pulled out a folded piece of parchment. Confusion colored the high-ranking members of Soul Society as a light tinge of pink dusted the ice captain's cheeks, not going unnoticed as he explained. I need to have this signed by my guardian to be allowed to go off Hogwarts grounds to a nearby town of Hogsmeade. A privilege given only to third years and older, seeing as I need to keep an eye out on the boy. Toshiro muttered out, his blush growing slightly with every which word as amused smiles broke out on every Shinigami's lips, not matter how subtle and large. The smallest being the head captain's and the largest being Yukataki. As Mayuri merely scowled as laughter began to echo much to the ice captain's embarrassment. Curse these wizards and their permission slips. Toshiro stood aside, perched under one of the many graying arches of the outer halls, as he watched along with his cohorts, supposedly, as Mr. Filch, a pasty-appearing man dressed in an ancient black suit and tie, as the apparent caretaker of Hogwarts, collected the previously mentioned permission slips, standing a step behind Professor McGonagall, who addressed the students. Remember, these visits to Hogsmeade Village are a privilege. Should your behavior reflect poorly upon the school, such a privilege shall not be extended again. McGonagall warned as the students paid their head of house minimal attention, as their eyes followed a certain ebony-haired boy clutching an unsigned permission slip. Let the drama begin. Hiranmaru commented curtly as Toshiro snorted in response, Sephiroth merely chuckling as the three spirits watched the Chosen One plead with Professor McGonagall. No permission form signed, no visiting the village. The Animagus professor said sternly to the silently pleading Harry, with a tone of finality in her words. That's the rule, Potter. No wanting to hear any more of it, the Transfiguration professor proceeded to lead the students out of the grounds, with Filch in the tow as he addressed the gathered students. Those with permission, follow me. Those without, stay put. However, determination flared in Potter's eyes as the students began to heed to Filch's words, other than Granger and Weasley who watched their friend beg solemnly, as the captain remained unmoved, his teal eyes blank in expression icily bored. Stopping the professor's strides, Potter began to reason with desperation, Filch proceeding without hesitation. Professor. I thought if you signed it, then I could, the boy began, only to be cut off by a stern shake of the head and the professor's words. I cannot, Potter. Only a parent or a guardian can sign. Therefore, seeing since I am neither, it would be inappropriate, McGonagall said with a hard glare, silencing Potter to silence as the fire dimmed in his eyes, finally realizing how futile his efforts would be. Sympathetic eyes of the professor met the green ones of the boy as he turned, the professor sighing lightly as she spoke. I'm sorry, Potter. But that is my final word. With a turn, the professor then brought up the rear of the receding students, only to be stopped once again by the icy transfer, who Potter and Weasley watched with suspicious eyes, Granger out of curiosity. Mr. Hitsugaya? The professor asked, her eyes slightly weary. Do you have a concern or question to ask of me? Quote. Yes, Professor McGonagall. Toshiro began as he lidded his teal orbs halfway. Those with permission, may we execute the choice of going to Hogsmeade or to reside in the corridors of Hogwarts for the day? Quote. McGonagall blinked in response to the question before she answered with slight tension. Yes, you may if that is what you so wish. Nodding his thanks, the captain merely walked away, past a dumbfounded Harry and Ron as the captain apparated away, his teal eyes dark as he fingered his golden time turner ominously. Chapter 9. Suspiciously bloody business. Toshiro sealed the roll of parchment with melted teal wax, the said seal encrusted with his initials, tying the essay neatly with a final black ribbon as the captain sensed Korahana enter the empty dorm, through the window, several packages in her talons. Greeting her with a small hum, the captain relieved the owl of her burdens, huffing with slight arrogance as she ate her reward set out for her, consistent of several scraps of meat and bread. Placing his letters from Momo Hinamori, his adoptive sister, aside, the captain tore open one from Yukataki, written on parchment that the ice captain that had sent back, enchanted to be unreadable to all but the sender and the intended receiver. If intercepted, the said parchment would instantly combust. Scanning the letter, Toshiro merely sighed with slight relief. There was no orders to heed other than the one he had received previously as the older white-haired captain, Kiyaraku, and Yuno Hana had apparently been ordered to see to pursue the history of his rumored title of being the Heavenly Guardian, with Byakuya Kuchiki, the 6th Division captain, doing the same in his family's private library. He, in the other hand, was to remain in Hogwarts and observe. Burning the reed parchment with a single lit candle in the room at the moment, the captain allowed the ashes to dance out the window before gathering several finished assignments into his bag that appeared too small for his things. Not bothering to put on his cloak, the captain merely walked out of the dormitory and common room, with his scarf over his neck and bags slung over his shoulder. The halls bustled with first and second years as a majority of the older years had taken to the nearby town, the captain paying no heed to the pointed looks and stares from the children. The rumors of his encounter with the boggart, although died down, were rather still insistent. After dropping off the assignments for nearly all of his classes with several shocked professors in the tow, the captain had decided to withhold his essay in preparation for Grindylows, seeing how the werewolf professor was not in his office. The full moon is nearing, master. Hirenmaru resonated in Toshiro's mind as the captain walked toward the dungeons, the last of his papers being a several-paged report upon the previously brewed drowsiness draft. The choosing of the beginner potion meant to torment Longbottom ever since the wildfire of the boggart incident had outspread the campus just as Toshiro's had. Perhaps, Lupin grows weaker and does not want to place his students in harm's way due to his ailment's nature. That would be wise, Elder. Sephiroth reasoned as he agreed. Werewolves are unpredictable and reckless once transformed, unable to recognize from ally or foe, attacking or running, dependent upon the degree of lost control. Yet, after their ordeals, they would recall all of their experiences, good and bad of it, until they once again revert to their prior forms. Toshiro finished mentally, as he had come to Snape's classroom, knocking to await the invitation to enter from the professor within. "Enter," was the curt invitation as the captain obliged, finding the potions master doing what he presumably did best. With a black cauldron upon his table, the professor appeared to be grinding indigo flowers after carefully removing its leaves and stem, intent upon the mere fleur. "Mr. Hitsugaya," Snape addressed his student with a raised whisper, the door closing behind the captain, who merely opened his half-lidded teal orbs a fraction, the potions master's tone not pleasant nor condescending. "What do I owe for this pleasure of your company?" Quote, "I have come to give you my assignment early, Professor," Toshiro replied with equal indifference as he held out a trio of scrolls for the professor, who took them with a risen eyebrow. "You may go, Mr. Hitsugaya. As you can see, I am preoccupied with duties as you, Captain Hitsugaya, in the other hand, seem to have a large amount of time in your hands." Snape dismissed the captain, placing the scrolls upon his desk, the captain being in his position as a student obliged, after addressing the potions master. "On the contrary, Professor," Toshiro replied, just as biting. "I have no intent of taking on the imagery of an atypical Gryffindor, playing with lackadaisical tendencies and second chances. It is merely I had so many prior duties that the mandatory duties of the West are so minimal in comparison to my own. I am able to complete my current duties with minimal effort. Even with your duty of providing Professor Lupin with his ailment with the Wolfsbane potion, I doubt that your duties currently exceed my own." With a lithe turn, the captain exited the office. Sensing that Lupin was within his office with Potter, the captain decided to drop off the last of his assignments, seeing as he might as well. Walking past the quiet halls of classes in session, the captain found himself at slightly ajar doors of the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, well aware of the brooding Ryotsu of a certain potions master several steps away. "Finished, Professor?" Toshiro whispered seemingly to no one. "Of course," Snape sneered as he neared the captain from around the corner of the hall, his black ragged robes billowing eerily as the captain merely rose an eyebrow at the dark blue wisps from the goblet in the professor's hands. "Not all of us have the disposition of lackadaisical and second-chanced Gryffindors." Sharing an invisible smirk with the potions master, Toshiro gestured for the potions master to enter first, both replacing their split-second long looks of amusement for masks of annoyance and bored indifference. Entering the empty classroom, the white-haired transfer and potions professor found the owner of the very classroom as of late in a certain green-eyed boy who was destined for great things. 3 guesses who, not that it was needed. The scent of a calming and, to the captain's distaste, sweet milk tea filled the almost deserted room, the pleasant conversation in the room interrupted by the two's intrusion. A tired smile spread across the werewolf professor's expression as the opposite took on Potter's, his frown displaying his obvious displeasure. Whether it was the captain's presence or the potions master beside him, the captain did not really care. "Ah, Severus and Mr. Hitsugaya," Lupin greeted, pleasantly enough as the captain merely nodded as the addressed professor replied with a morbid greeting. The werewolf professor seemed to address his cohort. "I presume that you have finished it?" Quote. "Of course. Seeing as it will be the one thing that would curb your ailment," Snape replied with a slight sneer, tinged with annoyance. "Yes," Lupin replied sagely as he sighed with slight saddened eyes, as the potions master handed over the goblet, with a certain student's suspicious green eyes on him. "It would be more doable than previous episodes due to this." Perhaps not, Professor Lupin." Toshiro cut in, his voice emotionless as usual, pulling out his last roll of parchment for the day to deliver. "But it is merely that we must do what we must to prepare for the inevitable, whether under suitable conditions or not. As sadly as that it is, Hitsugaya, it is true." The werewolf professor smiled cryptically as he placed the finished summary of Boggarts on his desk. Neither of the professors or the captain missing Potter's failed subtle effort of hiding his suspicion or confusion of the topic of subject for that matter. And this is their salvation. Toshiro thought almost in hopeless disappointment. "I would sooner leave my division under Matsumoto's care than to let that idiot that these wizards intel as their savior to save anything." "I agree with you notion, Master, however, didn't you leave the division under Matsumoto's care?" Hiranmaru teased as a scowl smeared the captain's expression, colored with slight annoyance. "Not voluntarily." Toshiro growled back as Hiranmaru and Sephiroth chuckled lightly, amused at their master's thoughts. "Then, I will take my leave." The captain exited as the potions master followed, neither displaying their notice of Potter's suspicious green orbs glaring on their backs. The captain had forgotten what today was. And now he was sorely and annoyingly reminded. Glaring darkly at the opened package of a variety of sweets, the captain audibly cursed in Japanese his lieutenant, for it was undoubtedly her, who informed the older white-haired captain of a certain night of the year when children, as a tradition, went around to gather candy and sweets throughout the night. Halloween. The captain groaned mentally as he closed his teal orbs in annoyance and obvious fatigue as the memories came back. The first time that the captain had heard of Halloween, it was coincidentally enough, his first year of his captaincy. The fact that many Shinigami had not known his appearance and youthful age, did not seem to ease the fact that many thought his lieutenant had put together a very convincing costume of a Shinigami captain. To say that Seireiti had experienced one of its coldest nights in its history on the eve of the 31st of the October was an understatement. Sealing his seal on an innocently appearing, particularly red envelope, the captain held out the roux-wrapped package and said envelope along with another white one. With a swift flap of her snow-white wings, the Maud Soul Owl took her new burdens and flew out into the descending night. "Eat something and retire for the night, master," Hiranmaru suggested to soothe his master's darkening mood. "Yes, perhaps the night will take a turn for the better at dinner, master," Sephiroth voiced with intent to risen his master's spirits. Deciding to heed the spirits in his inner world, the captain made no move to close the ajar windows by his bed. Instead, Toshiro draped over his cloak over his slim frame, his scarf and said cloak billowing behind him as he made his way past the oddly deserted common room toward the dining hall. Only for the captain's nostrils to be attacked by a sickeningly sweet scent. Teal orbs followed through the ajar doors to find children enjoying the annual Halloween feast, much to the captain's disgust. From eager tongues lapping rich chocolate sundaes to the candy-filled smiles that echoed in each table, the captain miffed away at the sight. Or not. Sephiroth and Hiranmaru added in the end as Toshiro merely silenced both of them with a dark grumble as he turned away from the temporary candyland of the dining hall. Only to sense an unfamiliar Ryotsu as he neared the Gryffindor Tower, by the fat lady's portrait. So, Black has finally shown himself. Toshiro mused as he transfigured his bracelet into Hiranmaru Gigai, tying the blade on his back, reserving to use his Zanpakuto as the captain pulled out his bone-white wand. Then, it would be impolite for me to not do so in turn. The triumph roars of the two dragons echoed in unison as the captain seemed to disappear in a burst of speed. "Harry? Ari? Y'all listenin'? Harry?" Ron all but bellowed to his best friend as he watched his best friend snap into attention, following the black-haired boy's gaze to the deserted doors of the dining hall. "What in blazes you lookin' at?" Quote. "What?" Harry replied rather stupidly as Ron and Hermione shot him concerned looks, Neville already sporting on of his own as he sat adjacent to the said boy, the other two across from them. "You were dazing, Ari. You alright?" Ron asked concerned as he clutched a half-eaten candy apple, nuts and caramel on his face. With a heavy sigh, the green-eyed boy wiped his chocolate-covered fingers as he turned to his friends with a serious look, green orbs shining with determination and certainty. Recounting from when the three were last together, the green-eyed boy began. "You know how Hitsugaya had decided to stay back at Hogwarts rather than go to Hogsmeade with you guys?" Harry asked, receiving two nods in question as Neville quirked his head in interest. "At first, I thought he was trying, to try something," Harry said sheepishly at first as Ron seemed to agree with his best friend completely with him, Hermione defiant at her friend's conclusion. "But I think he's after Lupin with Snape," Harry said darkly as even Ron looked at him with slight doubt, as the green-eyed boy continued, of his encounter of Lupin, of the interruption in the said professor's office in the form of Snape and Hitsugaya, the strange goblet and the evasive conversation that the three shared. They must be trying to poison Lupin so that Snape can get the defense against the dark arts position. Ron concluded with his blue-green orbs wide as Harry nodded grimly, Hermione cutting in as Neville wore a worried expression on his face. "Do not be ridiculous," she snapped as the other three could hear the lecture beginning in her voice. Professor Lupin said that he had an illness that Hitsugaya and Professor Snape had knew and therefore, rooted for him. Although, I don't understand why Hitsugaya would know about it. The foursome turned to the table of professors, from a seemingly unhappy Lupin who tried to mask his expression with a smile only for it to appear frail to a miffed Snape who eyed the sweets surrounding him darkly. Something was up and with the fact that Hitsugaya and several prominent professor had to do with it, a certain green-eyed and unkempt black-haired boy was going to find out. Later, after a grim conversation and many sweets, the trio with Neville in the tow, bounded up the interchanging stairs to their dormitory. Ronald's voice of Hogsmeade echoing. Honeyduke's sweet shop is brilliant, but nothing beats Zonko's joke shop. Ron surmised as they climbed the stairs, the marble stairway moving. But we never got to go to the Shrieking Shack. Turning to his best friend with obliviousness of the latter's mood, the redhead continued, only to be cut off. You heard it's the most haunted building in Britain, I know. Harry ended glumly as they all turned to the entrance of their dormitory, which was, oddly enough, was swarming with people. What's going on? The spectacled green-eyed boy asked. Probably Neville's forgotten the password, again. Ron supplied with a shrug, only to have his theory be debunked with Neville's indignant, "Hey," from behind. Oh, you're there. Ron all but smiled as a voice that tried to distinguish order but failed to, echoed to the trio's attention, the voice oddly familiar. Let me through, please. Excuse me. I'm head boy. Percy Weasley's nasal voice cried out, his pleas obviously ignored as he wormed his way through, eyes meeting the fat lady's portrait. Get back, all of you. No one is to enter this dormitory until it's been searched. Confusion colored the entrance of the Gryffindor Tower as a red-headed second year neared the just-as-confused trio. A frantic look on the girl's blue eyes as she looked at her older brother and two friends. The fat lady. She's gone. Ginny Weasley cried out as whispers and shock replaced the confusion of the surrounding students, as they turned to the portrait to find Ginny's words true. The golden frame was untouched, as one cannot say the same for the painting. Several diagonal slashes shredded the painting as it even seemed to scratch wood in the back of the portrait as the canvas appeared to irreparable, the only entrance and exit of the Gryffindor dormitory sealed. Serves her right. She was a terrible singer. Ron commented as Harry allowed himself a small snort as Hermione and Ginny seemed to not share the same sentiments. That's not funny, Ron. Hermione chided him as he merely shrugged. Nearby portraits and paintings seemed to be as chaotic as the children were with their whisperings and sympathetic glances, not wanting the same to befall them as they pointed and added to the chaos of the sight of the shredded painting. Make way. The headmaster's here. Come on, move. Move, I say. Percy's and Filch's voices echoed as the students made heed of their words, seeing Professor Dumbledore climb the steps of the stairway behind them. Other students of the other houses standing aside as they watched the chaos and curiosity. Soon enough, the headmaster was before the very shredded painting, his twinkling eyes colored with worry as he instructed for Filch to round up the ghosts to search for the fat lady, only to find that Mr. Filch had found her. Sighting of the lady, the children quickly rushed to the portrait that currently contained her, a scenic landscape of several boars resting in a yellow grass pasture, the lady herself in hiding behind the largest beast. Dear lady, who did this to you? Dumbledore breathed as he looked at her with sympathetically kind eyes. Whimpering, the lady complied, her voice in near tears. Eyes like the devil, he's got, and a soul as dark as his name. It's him, headmaster. The one they all talk about. He's here, somewhere in the castle. The lady cried as she lowered her terrified voice into a whisper. Sirius Black. Quote. Immediately, the whispers of the children grew to panicked tones and terror-filled conclusions, as the realization of a serial killer in the halls of Hogwarts had sunken in. In the midst of this, the headmaster turned to Filch, executing orders immediately. Secure the castle, Mr. Filch. The rest of you, Dumbledore addressed the children, his kind voice now stern and commanding. To the Great Hall. Heeding the headmaster's words, the children ran down the stairs, emptying the area like bees, leaving only the headmaster, doing the same as word outspread the castle of the presence of Black. Only to freeze in his steps as he noticed something on the ruined painting of the fat lady. fresh droplets of blood. A groan pulled the headmaster from the side as he turned to the point of origin of the noise, it being the lower right corner of the floor, several feet away from where the portrait hung. Kneeling to the hidden captain's eye level, the headmaster was joined with a confused Snape, both widening their eyes as they registered the sight before them. Undoing the keto barrier that subdued him to be protected and invisible, the captain sighed in relief. Blood dripped from long gashes on the captain's right arm as Toshiro's pale face shined with a thin sheen of sweat, his lips colorless from the loss of blood. Clutched in his injured right, was an unsheathed Hiranmaru, dripping with crimson as the captain turned his unfocused teal orbs to the headmaster and potions master, the former having lowered his voice to a whisper. "Mr. Hitsugaya. How did this happen to you?" Quote. The teal orbs of the captain hardened for a split second, then gleamed with a rare sign of fear as the captain whispered the name of the intruder within the castle walls, his normally commanding voice, shaky and filled with fear. Sirius Black. And with a roll of his teal orbs into his skull, the bloody captain fell unceremoniously into the headmaster's arms. None noticing the thin smirk on the captain's lips. Omake. The 10th Division lieutenant rolled unceremoniously on the couch of the newly reconstructed office, several piles of paperwork on her and her absent captain's desk. The strawberry blonde and curvaceous woman pouted as her thoughts traveled to her captain. "Mo, I wonder how is Taicho doing at his school," Rangaku mused to herself. "I hope he makes some friends. Ha, knowing him, he would rather be doing away with hollows than to try to make friends." Hineka laughed, her voice drawled. "Hiranmaru always tells me how he just wants your Taicho to play more. Everyone wants him to do that." Rangaku shot back lazily as a flap of wings brought the strawberry blonde out of her thoughts. Perched on her captain's chair, the white owl sniffed at the piles of unfinished paperwork disapprovingly, her ebony eyes glaring at her owner's lieutenant almost exasperatedly. It was at that moment that the other officers of the 13 court squads had entered, having been invited to the 10th Division for a sake party, courtesy of the strawberry blonde. Turning away from the glaring bird, Matsumoto waved her fellow colleagues over. Hisagi, Renji, Kira, Rukia, Hinamori. The strawberry blonde cried in welcome, sitting up to invite them all over to have some sake. Seating herself by the strawberry blonde, the brunette of the 5th Division spotted the snow-white owl as Rukia paused in the middle of her pounding of Renji and Matsumoto in urging Hisagi and Kira in drinking more. "Rangaku-san, did Shiro-chan send anything for me?" Hinamori asked the strawberry blonde as the addressed lieutenant shrugged and stood to relieve the owl of her burdens, the ebony glare as if saying, "Finally. I got one from Taicho." Matsumoto cried happily as she held out a red envelope after handing a single letter addressed to the brunette and the package of finished paperwork. "I wonder it says," Rangaku asked aloud happily as she broke the seal and slipped out the letter. Then with the amplified voice of the 10th Division captain, the red letter yelled out almost deafeningly through Seirei. Matsumoto. Quote. In his room, the said captain held out a special treat for his mod soul pet, several dried berries, fondly brushing his frosty fingers through her snow-white feathers as he read the letter of how Rangaku, under the impression of how he was watching her through the use of his new practiced magic from the west, was finally doing her paperwork, courtesy of Hinamori's letter and his howler, which seemed to work better than he had thought. Cooing in what may have been amusement, Kurohana peeked lightly at her master's hand, ebony orbs expectant. A small smirk played at the captain's lips as he placed the rest of the berries in front of her, cleaning his stained fingers with a rag. Maybe the Western magic may more useful than he thought. Chapter 10. Taming the Dog. Dumbledore walked slowly in the emptied Great Hall. Young Gryffindors laid on the floor with blankets and sheets thrown around, as the children slumbered, the ceiling displaying a star-filled night sky. The headmaster's face was pulled in a tired one, displaying none of his worry and fear for the fact that his students were placed in danger, but rather a fatigued and longing expression. Entering with a slight limp and lantern in hand, Filch reported his findings as instructed. "I have searched the astronomy tower and the owlery, sir. There was no sign of him." "Thank you," the headmaster replied, turning to the school's caretaker. "The third floor's clear too, sir." Percy piped in, entering behind Filch as Snape too made his appearance present with his own findings. No sign in the dungeons, as well. And no sign of Black, nor anywhere else in the castle. "I didn't really expect him to linger," Dumbledore replied, as he sighed, as if adding an afterthought. "Remarkable feat, don't you think?" Snape questioned with implicit demeaning. "To enter Hogwarts castle on one's own. Completely undetected?" Snape trailed off, his tone implying. "Quite remarkable, yes." Dumbledore agreed as if oblivious to Snape's diction. "Any theories on how he managed it?" Snape pressed. "Many. Each as unlikely as the next," Dumbledore continued as the two began to walk down the rows of slumbering children, Filch and Percy on the other side. "You may recall," Snape began, as the potions master decided to explicitly say it as it was so. "Prior to the start of term I expressed concerns about your appointment of professor. Not a single professor inside this castle would help Sirius Black to enter it," Dumbledore stated firmly, cutting off Snape in his words. "I'm quite convinced the castle is safe and I'm more than willing to send the students back to their houses." "And of Mr. Hitsugaya's state?" Snape inquired. "Will you contact his grandfather and father?" Quote, "Perhaps," Dumbledore replied grimly, only to add a hint of hope in his afterthought. "But as of now, let him rest." "Then of Potter? Should he be warned?" Quote, "Perhaps as well, Severus," Dumbledore sighed as they neared the said boy. "But for now, let him sleep." Noting the tone of finality in Dumbledore's words, Snape conceded as he followed behind the headmaster, towards to the castle's hospital wing. With a slow burst of the doors, the headmaster and potions master was met with a distressed Madame Pomfrey who tended to her one and only patient as of late, his right arm completely wrapped in bloody bandages, teal orbs hidden under his eyelids. "Headmaster." Madame Pomfrey greeted the entrance of the two, her worried cerulean eyes immediately filled with relief. "I have no idea how to heal Mr. Hitsugaya's wounds. I have tried every spell, jinx, charm, and potion for his wounds, but they make no difference." Before the headmaster could reply, a deep male voice spoke instead. "Of course not. Your magic is foreign, therefore, Toshiro's soul repels it. Or rather, I am sure he has informed you. His Zanpakuto does," it said simply as the three turned to see a small black cat with golden glowing orbs, flicking her tail playfully as wands were immediately drawn at the cat, other than Dumbledore who simply smiled. "I presume you know Mr. Hitsugaya, my dear cat?" Dumbledore asked kindly, as if he were exchanging tea with the said cat than in a tension-locked situation with two wands drawn. "How wouldn't I know my cute and icy nephew?" The cat asked rhetorically as it slipped behind a curtain, only for a slender dark-skinned woman with golden orbs and grape-colored hair pulled into a ponytail to step out, her smile playful as Snape widened his eyes in recognition of the ornately orange-robed woman. "And may I ask who you are?" Dumbledore asked just his friend Lily, as Snape and Madame Pomfrey lowered their wands reluctantly at the headmaster's look. "And as to why you are here?" Quote, the woman in question merely smiled. "She is my step-aunt, headmaster." The icy voice of the white-haired transfer rang out as the three turned to see the captain rip open his bandages much to Madame Pomfrey's displeasure, the aunt in question hovering over him as she placed her hands over the gaping wounds, glowing a soft green. Yoruichi Shiwan, the current head of the House of Shiwan. Yet as for your second question, I would need her to answer that. Toshiro merely blinked as his arm was quickly knitted back together. The once gaping wounds now stopped bleeding, leaving them raw wounds. Is that any way to speak your aunt, Hitsu-chan? Yoruichi smirked playfully as the ice captain merely scowled deeper and darkened his glare. Shiwan. Toshiro merely questioned silently, none missing the undertones of the ice captain's single word despite the change in language, as the addressed woman tore fresh bandages for the captain, wrapping the wounds tightly, golden orbs no longer playful. The head captain wishes to see you, Toshiro. He has been notified of the injury of your Gigai, courtesy of Kazuki, who had the foresight to attach an indicator to inform us if you were ever injured fatally. The former captain of the 2nd Division reported, applying the adhesive, sealing the bandages as the captain nodded a thanks. Damn that Urahara. Toshiro cursed as he narrowed his teal orbs. Then I presume that the head captain has sent you to assist? Quote. But of course, nephew. The purple-haired woman purred, her eyes colored with slight amusement only to turn serious once again. But I can only heal on a minimal of stopping blood flow. We have revealed too much for our liking, and I'm sure you share those sentiments, Toshiro. Very well. I shall report to head captain and I will explain my plan on a later date. Toshiro conceded as he shifted languages. Inform grandfather that I am fine and shall continue in my studies, this is a minimal complication. Stepping back from the ice captain, who was seated on the edge of the bed, Yoruichi knelt in one knee, her arm across her chest as she bowed her head. Yes, Hitsugaya Taicho. Retreating into the covers, the ice captain felt the fatigue of his blood loss sink in once more, as Yoruichi caught the unconscious Toshiro, who fell forward into her arms, Madame Pomfrey nearing in concern for her most recent patient. Dumbledore smiled softly as he met gazes with the purple-haired Shinigami, her playful gold orbs boring into his chocolate ones as Snape studied the woman with narrowed orbs of suspicion. I apologize for trespassing upon your grounds in such a way, Headmaster. Yoruichi smiled playfully as her golden orbs became steely. But after sensing that harms had come upon my nephew, we became concerned in regards your security of keeping a serial wizard out of your facility. Just as Snape was about to cut in to relay his own thoughts, Dumbledore spoke, his own smile just as playful yet eyes just as dark. I understand your concern for your nephew, my dear. However, in regards of our facility, I assure you that our staff are at work to apprehend Sirius Black at the moment. Dumbledore assured with a smile as Yoruichi replied with a large smile herself, ominously large like a clever cat. Do not misunderstand me, Headmaster. I am not concerned that my nephew will be placed in harm's way. I am only relaying a fair warning to you, the Western wizards of our world, that if I were to return, it would be to collect your souls. Yoruichi said, her golden eyes filled with promise and her smile bordering psychotic. Then, if you would excuse me, Lady Yoruichi. Dumbledore merely smiled and sent off as the purple-haired Shinigami winked, disappearing with a swift shunpo that was slow enough to pass for apparition. Silence enveloped the hospital wing as Snape tried to read Dumbledore's evasive smile, the two nearing the seemingly asleep Hitsugaya Toshiro, his permanent frown gone and furrowed brows relaxed, appearing even younger than usual. It seems as if our Eastern counterparts are more resourceful than we realized. Snape drawled as he sent a side glance to the Dumbledore who pulled the covers over Toshiro, who shifted slightly in his slumber. Perhaps, Severus. Dumbledore merely replied as he smiled warmly at the potion's master, who met the headmaster's gaze fully. But it has been a long day, and a surprisingly longer night, Severus. And I have no doubt that tomorrow will be no less eventful. Come, Severus. Dumbledore said as he turned away from the bed, walking toward the exit as he spoke. Mr. Hitsugaya needs to rest. It was several intervals till dawn when a white-haired captain seemed to appear in the creaking house of the shrieking shack. The moans and sinister sounds of the empty home mere rumors of superstition. Having conjured an ice puppet to replace his slumbering form, Toshiro walked through the haunted house, his steps soundless and silent as he made his way to the only occupant in the house. Low growls echoed in the house as Toshiro purposely made his presence evident, coming to a stop at an ajar door. With a sudden tackle, a large black dog dove through the door to its surprise to find no sign of the ice captain. "How disappointing, Black. I proposed to hear you out and yet you attack me," Toshiro drawled expressionlessly, albeit hinted with slight amusement and annoyance. As the black dog turned to find the ice captain within the room, arms crossed and eyes half-lidded in boredom. A soft whimper sounded from the dog, sounding like a small apology as the animagus shifted to a tall and pale man. The man was undoubtedly handsome, although it was shrunken as the said man was gaunt, his gray eyes sunken and ebony long locks ending coarsely at shoulder length. He wore stereotypical jail clothing, only it was faded and ragged, surely not enough to give the wearer much, if at all, warmth as the said criminal was barefooted. "My apologies, my boy, but I cannot be too careful being in my situation," Sirius apologized with a feeble yet cautious smile. The ice captain merely scoffed as he recalled his first meeting with the wanted fugitive of the Western wizarding world. A few hours prior. "So, Black has finally shown himself," Toshiro mused as he transfigured his bracelet into Hirenmaru Gigai, tying the blade on his back, reserving to use his Zanpakuto as the captain pulled out his bone-white wand. "Then, it would be impolite for me to not do so in turn." The triumph roars of the two dragons echoed in unison as the captain seemed to disappear in a burst of speed, wand at the ready. Only to reappear in front of the freshly torn portrait of the fat lady, the said lady already fled in fear, the perpetrator fleeing the scene, making his way to the nearest exit being the entrance hall. In the form of a large black dog, the ice captain merely took in the slashes that now decorated the ruined portrait, the ryotsu of the painting gone, seeing as the lady was gone. Disappearing once again with a simple shunpo, the ice captain had his wand over a transfigured Sirius Black, whose gray orbs were wide with shock and defiance, both in the outskirts of the Hogwarts grounds. Toshiro Hitsugaya, the said white-haired captain introduced, his fringe only adding to his icy demeanor of his eerily cold teal orbs, narrowed and conveying nothing but biting steel. "Now then," Toshiro drawled as he held out his middle and pointer finger at the man at his mercy. "Way of binding. No. 1. Restrain." With a swift jerk, Black's arms were rendered useless as the fugitive wizard fell forward, his arms locked behind his back, despite as much as he wished to move, the hold held him strong. Gray eyes glared up at Toshiro who studied his captive through narrowed orbs. The man was not who he had heard about from the rumors of the wizarding world. Of course, the captain withheld judgment, well aware of the consequences of a simple or even minor miscalculation. Even the smallest could have meant the changes of millions. Toshiro internally winced as the phantom pain of his scar sent a reminder of its presence, trying to subside his anger. Sirius Black, a supposed supporter of Lord Voldemort and a member of the infamous Death Eaters, Toshiro began as he met the fury-filled orbs that the captain knew very well. He wore them only as short as 3 years ago, meeting his cold teal ones. And an apparent murderer. "Give me one reason why I should not do away with your pathetic life." "Boy," Black began, the captain's eyes grown colder at the term, Black nearly spitting in spite as he spoke. "Will the truth not satisfy you? I am no murderer and I would rather die than have to support Voldemort." "Explain yourself," Toshiro ordered, his voice icy and emotionless. Seeing that he was in no position to refuse, the man complied. It began before Harry's parents, my friends, Lily and James, were murdered as you know, my boy. Sirius began, his voice cracking slightly as memories arose. I had been outwitted and was sent to Azkaban by Peter Pettigrew, who was responsible for their deaths. 12 years. Black cried in defiance as he glared at the captain, who blinked back, unfazed as he appeared aloof, even bored. 12 years, I rotted away in that prison. Obsessed over my innocence and revenge for Lily and James on Peter. Having pieced together the rest of the tale, the ice captain held out a hand to silence the man, who looked at his captor with confusion, only for it to grow even more so as Toshiro lifted his spell and hid his wand as he addressed the wanted fugitive. And so, having learned that Pettigrew was indeed alive, you escaped and have tracked him here to Hogwarts, where you tried to be allowed entrance to the Gryffindor Tower, only to slash the entrance in fury when you were denied. Am I wrong? Quote. With every word that came from Toshiro's lips, Black's eyes widened, his surprise and shock obvious as he regarded the boy in appearance in front of him. How? How were you able to? Quote. Scoffing lightly, Toshiro smirked darkly. It does not take much to piece together that much, Black. I am by no means an ignorant child, and I have seen mad and psychotic men, and you are not one of them. And since you have overstepped your boundaries, Toshiro remarked distastefully as he narrowed his teal orbs, his voice hard as if he were speaking to one of his subordinates. Hide yourself somewhere. I have no qualms as to where, as I will find you regardless of where you choose. We shall continue our conversation as soon as I am able to slip away. Then you will assist me? Sirius asked in disbelief as the ice captain glared darkly, as the criminal had no doubts that the icy child would hold to his next words. Do not mistake my actions as assistance, Black. Toshiro snapped, his voice icy. I have made a decision to hear you out and therefore, to spare you as of now. But do not have the ignorance of believing that I will not personally do away with you just because I have spared you once. Do not make me regret my decision. Nodding his understanding, the feared fugitive could not help but shiver at the chill that crawled up his spine at the white-haired boy's words. Something in those icy words promised to the framed criminal that the child before him would not hesitate to carry out his words to the T, if not, even willingly. Transfigure into your animagus form, Black. Toshiro all but ordered as the man immediately complied. With a swift and small thrust, the ice captain unsheathed his blade, slashing the disguised criminal in the hind leg, allowing blood to splatter over the captain excessively despite the non-fatal blow. A surprised yelp escaped the black dog's muzzle as feral instincts took over, retaliating a rather sharp set of claws on the ice captain's sword arm, the captain only darkening his expression in reaction. Realizing what he had done, Black nearly transfigured back when an icy voice made him pause, turning back to the ice captain who clutched his bloody arm with mild irritation and concealed pain. Do not bother, Toshiro growled, still holding an unsheathed and now bloody Hiranmaru. Remember my words, Black, and you shall live at the very least another night. I shall see to continue our conversation when I am able to. The captain's intentions dawning on him, Black nodded his furry head and dashed off into the forbidden forest, leaving the bloody captain alone, allowing a small smirk to color his lips. Master, are you sure upon your decision on assisting this man? Hiranmaru questioned as Toshiro was seated across Sirius, who sipped the summoned tea and small biscuits that the captain had made prior. He is not evil, merely framed. Toshiro replied internally as he held the cup at his lips. Black may be slightly unhinged due to his time in Azkaban, but he has survived while holding his innocence while being surrounded by those dementors. We can only commend him for his actions. If his side of the tale is true, of course. How is Black sure of Pettigrew's status? Sephiroth mused. Him being alive, that is? I suspect that as Dumbledore and the professors had informed us, it was due to the fact that the late Potter, Black, Lupin, and Pettigrew were friends. And friends, I would not put it past that the other three were ignorant of Lupin's condition. Toshiro speculated, as he ran a finger over the now cold tea. However, Pettigrew was given a responsibility over the Potter family, and the four were the only ones who were aware. And unbeknownst to the three, Pettigrew had gone rogue and had managed to turn the tables to Black, who was simply at the wrong place at the wrong time. Hiranmaru concluded as Toshiro nodded. "Toshiro, was it, my boy?" Quote. At the sound of his given name, the ice captain flickered his teal orbs to Black, who involuntarily flinched under the younger's, in appearance, gaze. "It's Hitsugaya to you, Black," Toshiro snapped reflexively, as he sighed seeing the other tense. "I come from the East, Black. As a transfer student to Hogwarts, if you will, to learn of the ways of magic in West. And in the East, unlike here in the West, we do not refer to each other by our given names, such as seen as rude and informal," Toshiro explained as he could see the man relax, understanding that the captain merely spoke in reflex. "I see, I apologize, Hitsugaya. I meant no offense to you." Black smiled softly as the captain merely waved in dismissal of it. "Now then, Black," Toshiro began as he sipped his tea, teal orbs that portrayed that the boy before the fugitive was much older and has seen much more than he may ever. "How are you certain of Pettigrew's status of being alive and breathing?" Quote. Sirius's gray eyes turned cold and steely with a hint of madness at the mention of the man, as the captain observed his company with scrutiny. "The Daily Prophet." The man all but spat as Toshiro awaited his elaboration. "The picture of the Weasleys when they went to Egypt." Toshiro was able to recall the said newspaper, for it was literally shoved in his face due to a rather optimistic Ronald Weasley who was rather keen to hear the captain's opinion to having visited Egypt. To say that the captain had given the redhead a small scolding was an understatement. There was nothing of great significance of the said moving picture, other than the famous pyramids behind the grinning Weasley family. "What of it?" Toshiro asked, his voice still icy and aloof. "Peter is in it," Sirius merely said as the captain rose an eyebrow, only to narrow his eyes once more in understanding. "The rat," Sephiroth confirmed as Hiranmaru growled, Toshiro having thought the same. "Elder and I had our suspicions of Weasley's pet, but had decided that it was of no great importance. A miscalculation," Toshiro replied, detached, as he received two growls of agreement, the captain standing as he made his way to the door, confused gray eyes on his back. "I must leave, Black," Toshiro began as he turned slightly to meet gazes with the criminal, the cold teal unmoving. "I shall assist you to do away with this Pettigrew, and upon the prospect of clearing your name, that shall be your concern, not my own." "Thank you, Hitsugaya." Black smiled warmly to the best of his ability as Toshiro scoffed. "Do not thank me yet, Black. I merely cannot allow you to die just yet," Toshiro replied as he disappeared with a soft, barely audible pop.
Unfortunately, this part is over. I hope you enjoyed it. Please have a good morning, afternoon, evening or night. See ya next time.